and it's a budget that has not pulled back on investments, right? So that's number one. Number two is very happy to see the focus on enhanced public expenditure on capex, because that is productive capacity for the nation, as also helping to create employment right way. And the thing I would like to really call on is the focus on rural, but I'm going to take the liberty of adding a fourth. You see, a lot of reform also needs to translate to the last mile, that's at the state level. And that is where plenty of opportunity is there today. And I'm very happy to see the proposed incentive plan for promoting reforms at the state level.
One I'm going to add is on the consumption side, because, being an FMCG major, you have your finger on the pulse of the consumption trends in the country. And that's an area that's been lagging behind a little bit in the economy in the past year. So some triggers, some levers that you see in the tone of the budget speech, or we're going to have to wait till July?
I think all of the directions that are being set for higher growth trajectory, opportunities for employment, opportunities for rural to scale up, all these, of course, should over a period of time lead to enhanced consumption. So at the end of the day, it's the economic progress that will lead to consumption.
Right.
And I think all these levers over a period of time should add to consumption, Kitty, definitely.
Purita Kumar Sinha, when the minister started, her speech, she said there is a need to focus on four major groups. That's what the budget aims to do: the poor, women, youth, and farmers. If this was the focus, was there enough in the budget to support and back all of these key critical components of our population?
Well, first of all, this being an interim budget, we can't expect a lot of detail spend on each of these segments. But I think the vision and the continuity that we're going to keep supporting women in particular, youth, farmers, and then the poor is, reassuring that vision hasn't changed. And these are the segments, in fact, that do need the attention of the government. The urban population is doing quite well. And, we've seen the affluent India getting more affluent, especially the stock markets have added to wealth. And so it's the segments of the population that don't have access to the capital markets. That's where the emphasis has been, whether it's for loans, whether it's for subsidies, whether it's for incentives. And that is what the government actually should be doing.
Mr. Goenka, one of the really interesting areas was this 1 lakh crore fund. It's for startups across the board. And the terms are very easy. I mean, the repayment schedule is very, very easy. That is at the core of the government's Atmanirbharta push, right? Do you
Yes, of course. I think we have been talking for quite some time on how do we promote R&D and investment in new things. And government cannot just give away things. And this is almost like free. If you're giving money with 50-year of interest-free return, it's almost like giving away free. And I would certainly hope that this is going to, first of all, we'll have to see how it gets implemented, because this is just an overall intent right now. But it will probably get divided into different sectors and different departments of the government and state and central. But I think this is going to really help in private sector to come into R&D in some ways. And in my opinion, that's one of the things that's lacking in India today, where private sector is not investing enough. So that will be a very good thing to do. And overall, I would say that this is certainly a budget of confidence. The government is showing that it's very happy with what it has done, what it has led to, and how we need to continue with the same things rather than bringing in lots of new ideas and new initiatives.
Utmost propriety as well. Given that it's an interim budget, it's really stuck to the technicalities of what an interim budget has to deliver. No big bang announcements, but hopes always run high. Mr. Vachani, before the budget itself, you refer to the fact that there was actually a really nice move, particularly for the space that you are involved in, Dixon Technologies. Just take a minute to flesh out what happened yesterday and what the impact of that really is. It was a pre-budget move by the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was very significant move, especially for all of us in the mobile phone manufacturing industry. So as you know, there were a lot of duty cuts which were announced, custom duty cuts. And these are basically on account of mechanicals and display and a lot of other components. So I think what this actually does is, one, it improves the competitiveness of the companies in the domestic sector. In a way, it also improves the global competitiveness, because if you come to think about it, while the whole idea is that we don't export our taxes and duties, but eventually our tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, do not get a refund of these taxes or duties. So we tend to pass it on. So I think with the duties coming down gradually, I think this definitely improves our global competitiveness. And I think most importantly, it also promotes the ease of doing business. Because what was happening was that there were a lot of classification issues with, these duty structures, different slabs. I think what the government has done, what the Honorable Finance Minister has done, is to kind of reduce the number of slabs so that, removes all sort of ambiguities. So I think all in all, a very positive step. And I think the target that we have for ourselves in the industry is of an export of $100 billion worth of exports of mobile phones in the next 5 years. And I think we are definitely inching closer to that. And these steps are definitely very positive in that direction.
It's interesting what you were saying, Manvi, that, she stuck to a clear path. It wasn't, there weren't very many political announcements. One would have thought there would have been a large number of political slogans ahead of the election. But in fact, the only one which caught sort of my ear was when she said previously social justice was mostly a political slogan, all right? Apart from that, it was a short sort of budget speech. There wasn't very much over there. But one of the areas she did focus on, sir, and I'd like you to talk about it, the Skill India mission. We were in fact discussing it even yesterday, which the government says has resulted in 1.4 crore youth being trained. This is essential for us to take advantage of our demographic dividend, right? Young people, reskilling, upskilling. Are these numbers encouraging, or does a lot more need to be done, even in the interim period?
Well, I would say the numbers are indeed encouraging. And of course, in a large country, we have a large youth, and that's our demographic advantage. So it will be a journey. So there will always be more opportunity there, definitely. But the numbers are encouraging. I think what is also encouraging is the number of very good institutions that have been set up. And the Honorable Finance Minister alluded to many of those, a few of those, I would not say all of them, a few of those. So I think all in all, very encouraging. And what is very encouraging also is that, there's continued focus. Ultimately, it's a journey, and we need to build it up step by step, and in each step, see how we can increase the pace. And that's what's happening. And therefore, I would say very encouraging.
Ms. Sinha, another key point which I noticed she did, of course, speak about the economy doing well. The average real income of people has increased by 50%. That's a very, very major statement. It's not necessarily all that visible, but statistically, it seems to be backed by the government or endorsed by the government.
Yeah, that actually, we haven't seen that number being calculated in the past. So it was interesting to hear that. Part of it is, of course, just in India, every year, because of inflation, the wages go up 8 to 10%.
But she said real income.
She said real income. I'm not sure if real income has really gone up 50% unless you take in the
it's certainly going to keep us all busy over the next few days.
Yeah, I think you have to take into account investment income. Perhaps if you add that, then maybe real income has gone up, but it couldn't just be from wages. And then, of course, maybe perhaps in the lower segment of the economy, like the farmers and the rural areas. Also, I think incomes haven't gone up that much from anecdotally talking to people. So I'm sure there is a calculation there that we haven't seen.
Dr. Goenka, this is a slightly philosophical question I'm going to ask you. You're a veteran of many budgets. You've seen it through different sectoral lenses as well. I'm just wondering if the content of this budget speech, in a sense, raises expectations come July, post the elections. And, does that mean, okay, we've spent the last few months really taking stock of India's economic growth relative to the rest of the world, strong position, inflation under control, work to be done perhaps on employment, but generally a pretty good story vis-a-vis the rest of the world. My question is, listening to what you did today, are there going to be really charged up expectations for July?
So let me first say this, that knowing this government, I don't think they're going to start working on July today. They would have already done that work. So they kind of
that's why I'm wondering if this is a teaser.
Yeah, so they kind of know what's going to come in July. And this is, in a way, the preview
Yes.
of what we're going to see in July. So yes, it has raised expectation, but in a very positive manner. I think if you look around here in this hall today, everybody will think that the budget has given. They came to kind of expect nothing much. I mean, you come and listen for a while and go back, but suddenly you see a lot of sort of hints of what might be coming in all sectors. It's not just about industry, it's about social sector, it's about infrastructure, it's about industry, it's about R&D, it's about education, it's about skilling, everything. So it's a preview which I think, yes, does raise the expectation, but I do believe that we will not be disappointed in July.
You know, the fiscal deficit, and Mukesh, I apologize in advance for putting the critical question to you. The fiscal glide path management seems like 24-25 is probably the best year in a while to have really ambitious fiscal deficit management path. In light of that, are you satisfied with what the finance minister's put out there?
So what you said factually for fiscal year 23-24 is correct, but I think you need to give a context. If I look at fiscal prudence, this is a golden period.
Yes.
You look at where we were immediately in the COVID year 2021 and where we are in 23-24. That's phenomenal. You look at it since the legislation of fiscal responsibility and budget management, 2004 legislation. This is a golden period for two reasons. Number one, not just the exact figure that you're talking about, but also that this is revenue as well as expenditure driven. In the past, fiscal consolidation were largely revenue driven, where a lot of expenditure was going into areas to pay off pensions, to pay off interest payments for market borrowings. She's demonstrating that in the last 3 years, I have not just achieved an unprecedented trend in revenue buoyancy, but also spent in capital expenditure, which will have a multiplier effect in the future. So yes, given the robustness in the tax collection, one would have thought that she would have struck somewhere at 5.6, so that 5.1 for next year would have been more achievable. But I think that if the revenue mobilization occurs at the pace at which it is occurring, both on direct tax and GST front, she may not miss a lot 5% target for next year.
I'm going to get Mr. Puri's views. If you could pull all the strands together of what the thoughts on the agri sector are. And again, it's a space where you have your finger on the pulse as CMD of ITC. Collect all the strands of what has come through in the interim budget speech on agriculture and lay out the path forward for us.
Well, I think it's quite encouraging, and we have to look at it in the context of the manner in which various interventions have happened over a period of time. And as I said earlier also, it's a continuation of the themes that have been there in the past. So in the past, there has been a lot of focus on bringing technology to the farm sector, a lot of focus on aggregating farmers either through FPOs or cooperative, because we have plenty of small and marginal farmers, a lot of focus on digitization. And now I think it's building on that foundation and setting very strong directions as far as, for example, sectors like some sectors were called out. It's sectors like aqua, 100,000 crores of exports, the dairy sector, oil seed sector. That's very important because that's our largest import basket.
Indeed.
Okay, so very, very strong direction set there, and I think it's indeed very, very encouraging. And this kind of sectoral focus, I think it is what is required to enhance the productive capacity and simultaneously create the market linkages. I think this whole idea of 5 integrated aqua parks is fantastic, because you really need an integrated ecosystem. Just like you need a competitive ecosystem in manufacturing, you need it in agriculture also. So an integrated infrastructure can help create that. Yeah. So I think all very good steps to really build on the potential that Indian agriculture has got.
Mr. Bachani, what really surprised me was that there's mention of the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which was announced on the sidelines of G20, and then it completely disappeared because of the war in West Asia. In an interim budget, which is far shorter in duration, for them to the government to actually put that in there and say, and what did they say? They said that it is an economic game changer for India, means that you are completely committed to this. That there is India seeking a resolution to the conflict in West Asia for this to take place. Unless that happens, this is impossible.
Yeah, I think if you look at from the electronic manufacturing sector point of view, I think it's critical that now we look at the export-led growth, right? Because if you look at the domestic market, even though the penetration levels of the products that we are in things like LED televisions, washing machines, and air conditioners, the penetration level is very low. Like hardly about 12% of the people own an LED television. I think similar numbers, products like air conditioners and refrigerators. So I think it's imperative that we in the industry look at exports as an area of growth, and I think these the agreements that we're talking about, those are going to be very critical in future.
A trinity of demography, democracy, and diversity has the potential to fulfill all aspirations. Just another quote I found in over there. I'd like to focus a little bit more on the role of women. Besides self-help groups, the minister did speak about the success of Lakhpati Didis. The self-help groups have empowered 1 crore women to become Lakhpati Didis. The government wants to increase that to 3 crores. Women as a key segment in our economy. How important is this one scheme? I actually heard 3 schemes being announced in an interim budget.
It's very much required, given that the participation of women in the labor force is lower than the aggregate number. Of course, we've made good progress in the recent past, and we certainly need to empower women. And that's only when the productive capacity of India can be, or the demographic dividend can be fully utilized. So these are very welcome. These are also interventions that will also support stuff at the rural areas.
Right.
A sense of enterprise will develop there also. Even it's important for agriculture, because when you're creating an agriculture ecosystem, you are also wanting to create, for example, entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs at the village level that will provide a range of services to farmers. Every farmer cannot own a drone, but can it be available on shared basis? So all these are, opportunities that need to be explored through the various schemes that the government has put in place. So certainly very welcome and very progressive.
I certainly note, when she recoins something like FDI from foreign direct investment to first develop India, it sort of ties in with the larger Atmanirbharta push as well. Puneeta, if I could ask you to, you could call it a somewhat personal question, but in your dialogues with your peers who come from different parts of the world, the discussions around the Indian economy, and if you could, on what they flag as gap areas still, the big picture, all accepted, fresh out of Davos, we've heard the commentary and all positive in nature, but really if there's some areas that need, determined action.
Well, first of all, I'm on a few global boards, and most of those companies are all looking at India as an area of strategic long-term growth. And most of them don't have much in India right now, but India is clearly on the radar to add the emphasis and focus and to look for opportunities. So the FDI that we are seeing, I think that number, first of all, is going to increase because more and more companies are looking at India. Now, what do they see as gaps? It depends on the sector. So in certain sectors, like one of the boards I'm on is related to financial literacy, the CFA Institute, there we don't see any real gap because the market is huge and the number of candidates from India are growing rapidly. So there's no issue in that area. If you look at the manufacturing sectors, there, of course, getting the approvals and setting up facilities or partnering with companies, often we find that the gaps are that the quality perhaps is not at the levels that you want. Even though there is cost competitiveness, the labor force isn't fully trained. So there's shortage of labor. I think those are some of the gaps that we run into, in addition to getting, basics like land, power, water, all of the basics. And then the legal system takes a while. So I think all of those are some gaps that need to be addressed.
So process improvements for one and quality standards for another.
Well, we're going to take a short break at this time, and we're going to come back with more analysis of this budget. It's a thumbs up budget, it appears, from most of, in fact, from everyone that we've spoken to. It's a short budget, an interim budget. It's got something for every segment, but we'll see a lot more in the paperwork and in the detail when we actually get a new budget, when it actually takes place. That'll be post the elections. That, of course, will depend entirely on who comes to power. But we're going to take a short break at this stage, come back with more. our post-budget analysis now. We had to run up to this stage because it was a short budget. But that's because it's an interim budget, but it seems to be an interesting budget. We've been looking at all aspects of it, joined by a couple of very important guests, Vikramjit Soni, Rajya Sabha MP, member of the Parliamentary Consultative Committee on Finance. Thanks very much for being with us. And Mr. Sujit Kumar, the BJD MP, also with us. Mr. Soni, let me come to you first. What in your mind is the highlight of this budget?
It's very positive with positive connotations, full of acronyms. GDP has been defined as governance, development, and performance. And of course, we have the theme was Gyan, which is Garib, Yuva, Andata, and Nari. But like Garib, they say 25 crore people have come out of the poverty line. And as I was listening to NDTV in the morning, the statistics is a big black box concept in India. We don't know this. And just now you were discussing the 50% increase in the income or real income and all those things. And there has been commitment of continuation of free ration to 80 crore people and all that. But really we have to see the empowerment of the poor. Again, the government have been saying that this free electricity or free ration is a kind of soap. But as long as we don't empower the poor to come out of poverty line. And then for Yuva, they have said they have skilled 1.4 crore youth. But my question is jobs. How many of them have got employment? We have issue of unemployment, and unless the skilling is related to the jobs, skilling, and the budget quote unquote says they have been made job ready. So I don't know what Honorable Finance Minister means job ready.
No, so the numbers for skilling is large. So what you're saying is that how many jobs have resulted?
Yeah, jobs
in
is
that
important.
skilling?
No, just skilling is like halfway
But
through.
can I interrupt you for this?
Yeah.
Half a second. You were talking about poverty and an absolute reduction in poverty. This is the claim of the government. They say 25 crore have been elevated from multidimensional poverty in 10 years. They've stepped out from multidimensional poverty.
Yeah, that
in
includes
terms of what
health,
they're claiming.
education, and all those things.
Right.
But still, we have to give free ration to 80 crore people and electricity. That means we have a very large kind of poverty, who cannot earn their meals, even ration. So that was my point. And coming to Andata, let me complete Gyan. Now there has been no mention on any MSP support and ground implementation. And we all know that other than wheat and paddy, farmers are not getting any sort of support for corn. There is something, a lot of things are on paper. Actually, we are not getting crop residue management. Vishnuji, you know that every year we have in Delhi this environment issue.
Yeah.
So I was hoping Finance Minister will announce some subsidy,
Some measures on pollution.
measures on crop residue management.
Okay, sir. Let me just
stubble
keep
and-
the strike rotating, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Sujit Kumar. How would you look at this? A glass half empty or a glass half full? Sorry for the cliche.
Well, this being an election year, what stood out for me is the fact that in an hour-long budget speech, she devoted almost 40 minutes to highlight the achievements of her government, of the government of PM Modi, and rightly so. Why not? There was nothing spectacularly new in the budget. It was largely a continuity of the FY 23-24. She focused largely on macroeconomic stability and maintaining the growth momentum, 7.3%, whatever we have this year. For me, the other 2-3 highlights are fiscal consolidation. She stressed on the fact that we will reach the fiscal deficit target of 4.5 by 25-26, which I think is possible, given that for 24-25 she is expecting 5.1 of fiscal deficit. The other big highlight is the focus on capital expenditure, infrastructure, 11% hike, which was already substantially large. 10 lakh crore was allocated last year. On top of that, 11% hike has been allocated this year, which I think is great. Green growth is another focus area. We have seen that Prime Minister Modi has been talking about India being.
But did you see enough in this interim budget?
Yeah, we did see that. She spoke about this offshore wind,
Right.
viability
Yes,
gap
you did.
funding
Yes,
for
yes.
offshore wind projects. She spoke about this scheme which was announced by Prime Minister Modi on 22nd of Jan, very, very auspicious day. 1 crore households are to be connected through the solar rooftop solar to the grid. She also spoke about making bio CNG mandatory, blending of bio CNG with CNG. So these are all, I think, great announcements, which will certainly help India to become a leader in the green space. And Prime Minister Modi has has articulated his goal of net zero by 2070. He has often spoken about, even in G20, sustainability was a key theme. So I think there are, and my friend Saini ji was talking about Gyan. There was focus on women. Prime Minister Modi, and in fact, Her Excellency President Ma'am also yesterday spoke about the 4 priorities: youth, women, farmers, and poor. And there is massive focus on youth in this budget.
Sure.
Whether you talk of health for women, or whether you talk of SSG funding, whether you talk of increasing the number of Lakpati Didis from 1 crore to 3 crores. So I think, and finally, I will really hail this government for the focus on R&D. I have been talking about the need to increase our spend on R&D from 0.7% GDP. If you compare comparable numbers, Israel 4.8, US 3.2, China 3.5. So we are nowhere close to these countries when it comes to our spend on R&D. In this year, in the interim budget, the Honorable Finance Minister has spoken of a corpus fund of 1 lakh crore, which will be spent for the sunrise industries R&D. So these are some of the highlights.
Sure. Manvi?
Firuz Kambata, welcome, Chairman of RASNA, leadership positions in various capacities of the Confederation of Indian Industry. We haven't had a chance to take stock after the budget speech. So what stood out for you?
Sometimes, no bad news is good news.
Yes, I agree.
So I'm happy because I was thinking they will sort of rob the rich and pay the poor or something, have a populistic budget, but luckily nothing of that sort is there. I think that
So
is very
status
good.
quo,
No, I
appreciate
think
that.
that shows the
That may
confidence
still
of the
happen when the
government that we
actual
are
budget
coming
happens.
back. We are coming back with a bang, and that time we will get all those. So our expectations are probably very soon we will get. So that is, I think, on that side. But I think somewhere to say that, okay, this is the fiscal deficit and we will stick to it and we will make it less, I think it is very positive, because what you last want is to have an economy which is sort of settled by inflation, because we don't want to get that. Most of the countries go wrong on that. And I think for a customer also, cost of goods is something he wants to go down. So I think it is very positive. Coming to what industry wanted and what has got, I don't think we had expectations from an interim budget. So not that we are expecting any income tax swaps or something of that sort. But I think the directions we were expecting, and the directions are very clear. Like one direction I definitely like is India first for manufacturing. And I have said probably from last 10 years that you get your PTAs and FTAs, the free trade and preferential agreements, correctly. We want India to be a manufacturing hub. If a foreigner says, I want to use India as a market just to put my goods, I don't think it's true. Come, invest. And I believe invest in the heartland, invest in infrastructure, invest in rural areas. And then of course, use the Indian market yourself. And then get mid-level playing field. So to say India first, so first develop India is a very good approach. It gives a direction. Number two, to say that we have confidence in the taxpayers, honest taxpayers. We are saying up to 25,000, there are small disputes. We'll settle those. I think it is very positive. And I always believe that should be extended to many other litigations. The government is a big litigant. Litigants of government, PSU litigations, ESI, PF, whatever, VAT, octroi of 20 years are pending in courts. You take an amount and say up to 5 lakh we'll settle. You pay something and settle. I think this is a very good direction they have taken in this.
And it's a
budget.
good signal that,
And it's a good
let's not
signal of
get stuck in the
confidence.
weeds.
It is confidence also. And I think it gives us the confidence also. And I think, honestly speaking, this Vivad se Vishwas is something very good. What is wrong in it? I think we are all citizens and we require that. Number third, which I liked in the budget, which I was probably not expecting, but is the fact of this innovation fund which has been mentioned. I am also the honorable consul of South Korea, and the best thing of South Korea I feel is their whole manufacturing is led by research development, and they give a lot of importance to that. Tie up with universities, so you tie up, the private sector is encouraged. 11 lakh crore is a big amount. So in the sectors identified, you get a 50-year, I'm told, a 50-year tax-free loan to innovate and put your. I think that is the right way to go. For example, in our sector also, I was in just Goa 2 days back, and what I announced is that the huge thing is everybody's moving to plant-based. And I am surprised that though India is agriculture economy, the technologies for plant-based proteins and plant-based foods is coming from abroad. So why not in India? So like we announced that we will be working something on cashew nuts to make cashew milk and all that as a sort of an alternative to others. I think these are the type of things which I think I'm very sure will help. This funds will very help these type of efforts.
Vishnu?
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much, for sharing your thoughts, your initial reactions to this budget. We're going to go into the fine print in a little while from now, but we're going to take a short break at this stage and come back with a lot more. Continuing with our focus on the union budget, it's an interim budget this time around. We're joined now by Mr. N.K. Singh. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. Just pick up your mic, Mr. Singh, and let me just get, a couple of thoughts from you. What in your mind was the key highlight? Some of us were just suggesting that perhaps the fiscal deficit being kept or projected at 5.1% is very welcome news indeed.
Well, I think that a couple of things. For one, you have rightly pointed out the story that many who had expected that, considering that this budget is being presented just a couple of months before the general election, there were a tendency for a lot of populist freebies, which would show on the fiscal numbers. But I think that the remarkable trust and confidence which the government has displayed, there is no evidence of that. If anything, if you ask me, there's an overachievement on the fiscal numbers instead of by 0.1%, which is not small. And the fact that there will be a 0.7% consolidation or 0.7% of GDP in 1 year, looking at the GDP numbers today, is not nominal by any chance. And considering the fact that, if anything, there will be an overperformance and an undercommitment. You look at the revenue numbers which have been assumed. The revenue numbers which have been assumed have been just a buoyancy of 1.1%, whereas we know that there will definitely be revenues which will be better than this. Look at the nominal GDP numbers which have been assumed. If anything, there's an undercommitment and overperformance.
Right.
This budget demonstrates the fact of India's continued confidence on high growth in the region of 7% plus. We is the fourth year in which we would be doing that. The Reserve Bank is projecting a 7% real growth in the coming year. This will be the fourth year, and this augurs well for continued overall macroeconomic stability, political stability, and the fact of India looking at a Viksit Bharat through a growth rate of well over 7% or so in the medium term.
One of the most interesting statistics which actually came out, and of course it is an abbreviated speech, was that average real incomes, the word real important, of people has increased by 50%. It's not easy to calculate that, and I would suspect that that could be somewhat controversial. Could you tell us your thoughts on that? Or on what basis?
Well, you know,
has
I
that been
think that very frankly, I don't want to go into the methodology or the arithmetic of it. It can be problematic, as you said, Vishnu. But there is enough anecdotal evidence in terms of the some of the areas which show that there would be more than a grain of truth in the numbers which the government has projected. So I think this is part of the same story that, as I said, that for the fourth successive year, immediately after the pandemic, to come up with real growth rates of this kind is really for good reasons. Therefore, the international community and multilateral entities are saying that today, by any reckoning, India is the global bright spot, which is combining continued political stability, continued macroeconomic stability, and a renewed confidence in a widespread growth using technology in an exceedingly creative way. And I agree with the comment which I just heard, that having an innovation fund this time was an important area. The fact that, Vishnu, the document 2 days ago showed that out of the over 1 lakh crores which was given for capital expenditure of the states, utilization has been in the region of 90% plus, shows that the states are becoming important partners in this growth story. And this is a real federalism, what the Prime Minister had earlier called Team India at real work, and the outcome is evident for us, all of us, to see.
You know, you bring up infrastructure investment. We see about 10-11% increase in the allocation to infrastructure this year. Very valid point you've made about states keeping pace with center when it comes to infrastructure spend. My question to you is twofold. A 10% increase, I mean, I thought, you know, a 20% would have been sort of unexpected lines. But the second question is, well, it can always be hiked in July, right?
So I think the 2 points, since you have made, I'll reply by 2 points. First, if anything, I had said earlier, if you call, it is better, Manvi, to always underpromise and overperform. And this budget is yet one more example of that. I thought that please recognize the fact that this 11% increase has come on the top of the menacing pace at which the infrastructure and capex has grown in the last 2 years. So you must take it in relation to the background and the fact that I agree with you with your second comment. The Prime Minister said that this is an interim budget designed to serve a particular purpose, which the Constitution enjoins upon it. The full budget will only come in July. And also recognize the fact that the Finance Minister went out of her way to say that she has not in any way tampered with any of the Part B, which is on the tax rates and so on.
She said it clearly twice.
Completely left intact in a manner. And as I said, that the revenue buoyancy which has been projected has been a rather modest one. I would expect revenue buoyancy to be certainly better, looking at the fact that the GST in the last 1 year has done so exceedingly well. Direct taxes have picked up to show really that the overall tax to GDP of the states and the union combined would be over 18% this year. Of course, there is room for much more, but these are all signs that when we come to the full budget, there is going to be a real upward swing in the positive direction.
I'd love to pull Punita Kumar Sinha into this. Reflect a little bit on the idea of how much government spending becomes too much and crowds out private investment. Because, while the economy has been powered by government investments, one area has been of concern that private investment is not keeping pace. When is the baton going to pass?
I mean, yes, I think since COVID, government investment has been the driver, not just in India, but in many countries, to stimulate the economies. And so the economies had to use that government stimulus. But now that the government spending has kind of stabilized and it's growing, as you said, 10%, I think what has also happened is that the private sector has got confidence, and the capital markets have been actually very helpful. So we are seeing increasingly more and more companies come to the market. We have an unprecedented, secondary offerings in the market. The SME market is booming, so smaller companies have access to capital. Even though they're not listing, they're getting their blocks placed like within a few hours. So there's a lot of capital that's going into private sector from the investor community, and that is going to result ultimately in capex on the ground. Some of it is going into financial services firms, so that will be a multiplying effect. The leverage also helps. So I think there is going to be a lot of capex coming in different forms from the private sector, aided by the confidence and the capital markets buoyancy.
I'd like to thank all of you very much for being with us. It's been fantastic getting your insights in on the budget. We're going to take a short break at this stage, come back with a lot more. Do stay tuned.
Interim Budget 2024 coverage continues right here on NDTV. Pleased to welcome back Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of CII, and we have R. Dinesh, who's President CII and Executive Chairman of TVS Supply Chain Solutions. Welcoming Dr. Naresh Trehan, CII National Healthcare Council Chairman and Chairman and MD of Global Health Limited. We haven't talked since the budget speech, so I'll do a quick set of reactions from each one of you. Mr. Dinesh, if I could come to you first.
I would say consistent, setting the right expectations and the direction for the future, but also taking care of the equitable growth perspective, which I think is very important for the economy.
CB?
So I think it's number one, prudent. No shocks in the budget. Fiscal discipline, huge. Increase in capex,
Decent.
decent, I must say. Acknowledgement of the private sector having started investing, which is important, and I see a lot of opportunity there. And a budget for all, because we were talking about rural India. We see that pretty much there for rural India, for women, for healthcare. I think that way it's quite a complete budget.
Okay, Dr. Trehan?
So in spite of it being a budget on account, there has been some reasonably important announcements in it about healthcare. So starting with the fact that there is actually a severe need for increasing the number of doctors graduating, because we are about half of what we should be by any standards around the world. So that will be a big welcome news for all of us to say the availability of doctors, of higher quality doctors, will be there soon. So that's one part. The second part is that there has been a lot of emphasis on vaccinating young girls, women who are very prone to cervical cancer. And cervical cancer is a deadly disease. So that is also welcome. The more important thing that I think is that it has encouraged the frontline health workers like ASHA workers and the Anganwadi workers by bringing them under the coverage of Ayushman, which will give them a lot of security and boost their confidence in moving forward. So I think in spite of the fact that it's only on account, that overall it was a very positive move towards inclusiveness for women and healthcare workers.
A large fund for innovation, reference to sunrise sectors, defense included, an innovation fund of this kind, with this kind of corpus. Would you say that's fairly remarkable?
And actually, in a way, that answers the question of how Indian industry and India is going to stay competitive in not just now, but for the future, right? And the focus on innovation and R&D is from CIS perspective and as well as Indian industry perspective, it's brilliant. But most importantly, the length of the period, with a 50 frame in mind, I think it's going to allow us to take the challenge and also be ready to spend money to support the innovation. The second aspect of it is how do we then involve the smaller companies in that? And that's where the focus on newer technologies, adaptation to those newer technologies, and support for them. So I think both coming together will be a big win-win, not just for growth of Indian industry, but also increase India's competitiveness.
CB, from a green push, a renewable push, I could list the 3 or 4 references that she made, whether it's expansion of solar rooftop, but, broadly speaking, was that enough to your mind? Because that's something that industry is preoccupied with.
Yeah, so one very important area, as you said, is, as I saw in the budget, was the focus on green and sustainability, green manufacturing, EVs, I think, and the fund which is being created. I think it really, today, when we are talking about a future of mobility and public transports, buses, I think this is a very important focus. Both, you see the type of manufacturing, it triggers a whole lot of manufacturing sectors, but it also keeps us prepared for our sustainable goals as well as being competitive globally. The second part of it is the chain.
be into the green chain, which is important for both our large companies as well as them to be plugged into the global. So I think that that's going to be very, very important. And you also heard about biomanufacturing. So these are very critical points when we really look at the entire space of technology combined with green tech and the future of sustainability. I think that's a very wholesome focus that we saw in the budget.
And she said very categorically, no changes on taxes, direct, indirect. In case anyone missed it, she repeated it the second time. But, I think, again, they're looking at sort of disposing small tax demands, which are really old and below a certain threshold amount, 25,000, 10,000. It also says, look, we're looking to clean up the system, right? Do you agree, CB?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that focus on is been, if you really, what the finance minister spoke about, it's just not the tax rates, etc., but the way we deal with the tax ecosystem today. The ecosystem is changing, and I think there's a focus on making the entire tax ecosystem easier, friendlier. GST has become so easy. So all of this is a success story in a sense that it's not just the corporate taxes and GST and all, but if you really look at in the survey that she referred to us to, the ease of taxation, tax filing, and the returns, all of that gives a lot of comfort to just not the corporate houses, but also just the common man. So tax ecosystem being cleaner, easier, it was a huge issue a few years back, and we've come a long way.
Mr. Dinesh, and I leave it to you to figure out how to answer this. But, we had modest expectations from a vote on account interim budget. But is there an area which wasn't addressed, which CI was fairly sure and confident would be touched upon, which was missing in the budget speech?
Definitely not any large ticket item. As I said, the idea was that whether there's been a direction being given or not, which was given. I think the only area where in the budget has not been addressed was maybe the continuation of the lower corporate tax rate for manufacturing companies being set up. But that's a very specific issue. So we don't know whether it may be taken up later or in the final budget. So for us, I think we had always expected clear direction, the focus on making sure the equitable growth takes place and making sure the capex doesn't go down, which I think all three have been taken care of. So it's all in all a very positive feel is how I would put it.
10-11% increase in capex by the government and room to do more when you have a full budget come July potentially.
Sorry, and I think you should add that there is also a reduction in government borrowings that gives scope for corporates to increase or have access to increase in borrowings.
So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Srihan, an unfair question. Given what you've seen and heard today, are your expectations for post new government full budget going to be running much higher?
So, there are several aspects that actually influence our ability to take healthcare, affordable healthcare, to the last person standing on the Indian earth. Okay. And one of the big things is when we talk about innovation, we talk about Atmanirbhar, we talk about manufacturing. Today, a large part of the cost comes from importing electronic equipment, which is sophisticated, still not manufactured in India. The taxation is very high, and the companies which work in tandem with each other, the three major manufacturers around the world, they make it so end of life 7 years. So you don't even recover the cost of it. So, but unfortunately, all this is passed on to the patient. So once we have our own manufacturing, our own innovative solutions, I think it'll not only help us in delivering healthcare at a lower cost, but also it is relevant for 4 billion people, other people who are in the same situation as us. So I think India can be the leader. The pinch points that we feel today is that different from all other industries, we pay GST, but we don't charge GST to the patient, so we have no input credit. So that's where it is all passed on. So ultimately, it all goes to the patient's cost.
And
So
this is a
that's-
good time to list them because, time between now and the full budget for Finance Ministry to pay heed. Final sort of thoughts from each one of you before I wrap up our conversation today on Interim Budget Day. Mr. Dinesh.
Very happy, clear direction. Looking forward to seeing what the main budget is going to be all about. Seize the opportunity with regard to innovation and see how the private sector can benefit from that.
CB?
So I think inclusive, very inclusive even from the point of view, the railways last mile connectivity that we spoke about. I think development oriented and prudent, fiscal and all of that we spoke about. And I think one very important aspect that we have seen besides the rural India focus, which I liked, was the focus on women and the focus on child. And I think these are very, very important areas for us to really work on for a future of India.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time and insights here on NDTV on Interim Budget Coverage Day. Our continuing coverage here on NDTV of the interim budget 2024. Pleased to welcome Deepak Shetty, CEO and Managing Director, JCB, and Chairman of the CII Infrastructure Council. Many thanks for joining us on NDTV. I'll get straight to it. Dive into infrastructure first, because we see a 10-11% increase in the government infrastructure investment. I have to say, I was betting on a 20%. So when I see a 10-11%, I'm like, that's not the level one would have anticipated. But my opinions aside, what's your assessment?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you. I would say that we should not be sort of stuck with the number.
Okay.
As we have seen last few years, the government has continuously focused on infrastructure. The quantum of investment is continuously improving, and we have seen on the base is expanding. So last year we have seen a 33% growth. So 11% on top of it, I would say, is positive. But more importantly, it's not about only about the allocation. It is about what is the primary focus of the government, and that is very heartening. And that continuity in policy, that continuity in thought and mindset, I think is very, very positive.
So when you say primary focus, what are you looking at?
So I would say, if somebody asks that what are the three top elements of the budget, infrastructure stands out.
Always, in the last few years.
And we all know why, because infrastructure has such a multiplier effect on the economy, and also the need for infrastructure in the country. And somebody asked me, what did you see in last 10 years? I think continuously we have seen the government focusing on infrastructure, and we are seeing the impact of that particular focus, the way, I think all of us, it is touching everybody's life today. So I think very, very positive.
And what's noticeable and positive is also the way now states are stepping up to keep pace. So the central government is setting the tone and incentivizing states to also invest in infrastructure.
I think it's a very important point you make, and sometimes we take our eye away from the fact that infrastructure is not only created government policies, but also states play a very important role. And it's very heartening to see this 75,000 crores, disbursement to the state governments. I'm sure part of it will be invested by the state governments in creating infrastructure, particularly in the rural areas.
And my understanding is that there is a lot of supervision, monitoring to see that that money at the state level is deployed in intended infrastructure ends.
I think that is where the Honorable Finance Minister very specifically mentioned about time-bound or milestone-based. I think that is very positive. What you are alluding to is very true, very right.
So there is the whole private investment piece, because government investment in infrastructure is something that's been powering the Indian economy. The private investment, well, we've had fairly detailed insights on that, so I won't get into that. What I wanted to ask you, Mr. Shetty, is, if there's one area where you would like the government to put a little more energy and focus, given your understanding of the infrastructure space, what would it be? Because this is as good a time as any to put forward thoughts ahead of the full budget later in the summer.
I think there was one element, government, it was Honorable Prime Minister's announcement on hydrogen. As part, the government has announced the green hydrogen mission. I was expecting some announcement on that front, because however, I should also appreciate that the Honorable Finance Minister spoke about supporting the solar rooftop, etc. So what is very heartening to see is, in the Western world, we have seen in the past that when the growth or development happened, sometimes the green part has been sort of put aside. But I think the government is showcasing that the growth is good, but growth is equally inclusive and not touching one sector, but various sectors. But hydrogen is, again, something that India is going to play a role, and India can play a very big role. So I was expecting maybe some announcement on the green hydrogen side.
Okay, so it would have been within the bounds of propriety to flesh out the green hydrogen piece. We did, of course, notice that this was an interim budget which was in spirit, in technicality, just what an interim budget is supposed to be. But having said that, the space that you operate in, and let's step away from the interim budget and policy measures, the space that you operate in, how would you describe it currently in terms of what's going right, what's going wrong?
So I'll recognize the rights first, and I think very, very positive. the construction equipment sector, which I represent, we are seeing a remarkable growth over the last few years. The growth, first of all, the Indian market itself is growing. Last year, the construction equipment sector grew by more than 28%, which is very, very positive. Also, majority of our machines, if I speak from JCB point of view, we've got almost more than 2 lakh machines which are operating across the country, which are connected by telematics. And when we see the data which comes to us, we see the growth which is taking place, the utilization of the machines improving. So it is not merely talk. We see what's happening.
You have the data to back it.
As rightly said, we have the data to back it. Stepping away, we are also seeing a huge growth in export market. Today, India, in the past, these machines used to be imported into India. Now they are not only being manufactured in India. I'm very proud to mention, we at JCB today are exporting to more than 130 countries outside India. And that is what is very important, that as the infrastructure development happens, the sectors which are connected, like construction equipment, the whole supply chain develops. Majority of our suppliers are in MSME sector. And today, they not only supply to OEMs like JCB and others, but they are equally exporting. I can tell you, JCB has 23 factories around the world, and majority of them get today components manufactured in India. So it's very positive that how a focus on one sector creates a multiplier effect across the value chain.
I'm so glad you've spelled it out, because I don't think sometimes we pause to consider what infrastructure development means when you go wider and deeper into the supply chains. I'm going to leave it at that. Deepak Shetty, thank you very much for your insights. Pleasure having you here on NDTV.
Pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you. NDTV network, continuing coverage on the interim budget, February 2024. Exercise more than anything else, and a tone-setting exercise as far as the finance minister is concerned. Very clearly, she highlighted no changes as far as taxes, direct or indirect, are concerned, but definitely delivered lots of nuggets of where the government is focusing areas, putting money aside as well, particularly when it comes to innovation, and measures when it comes to greening of the economy. We're very pleased to welcome at this stage Kunal Behel, co-founder Snapdeal and Titan Capital, chairman also of the CII National Startup Committee, Anshuman Magazine, chairman of CBRE and member of the CII National Council, Vipin Sondhi, chairman of the CII Industry R&D and Green Mobility segments, and former CEO of Ashok Leyland and JCP. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Our schedules have all moved up because the speech was shorter than anticipated. I'm going to dive straight into it. And Mr. Behel, if I could come to you first, what stood out for you? A big fund for innovation. Clarity will come in weeks, in the following weeks, on exactly how that fund will be allocated.
Thank you so much for having me. Look, this government is all about making big goalposts and then working towards achieving them and then achieving them. So for the startup sector, one of the big areas of focus has been investing in the deep tech space. However, these are long gestation period businesses. This is space tech, defense tech, biotech, and various other types of deep tech businesses. They take a long time to gestate and start generating revenue. And as a result, getting loans at attractive rates of interest or zero interest over a 50-year period, which almost is in the realm of a grant, is incredibly useful as a fuel for giving this entire section of the startup economy a boost. Our country has shown again and again that we can leapfrog using technology. We leapfrog the digital transactions era with UPI. In 7 years, we've gone from almost no traction to ubiquity. Same thing, it seems that the government is focused on delivering with the deep tech sector. There is a clear opportunity. Most of the world is at the same level right now, in a narrow band, right? And we have the opportunity to really leapfrog and be a market leader and a global leader in the deep tech space.
So you're saying this fund, the terms attached to it, is indeed a very significant sort of initiative that the government has put forward.
Absolutely. And what happens is for these startups which are in the deep tech space, getting equity capital at the early stages is very challenging, given they're not going to show revenues for a while. The fact that the government recognizes that, the fact that they realize that unless they provide the impetus, they provide the boost, they provide the capital, many of these companies will never see the light of day. And so this is extremely prescient on their part. And we will see the impact of this on the country over the coming years and possibly decades.
And we look forward to taking stock with you continually on this. Anshuman Magazine, the focus is on infrastructure in the last few years. We often forget that there are many add-on sectors that benefit from it. But today, we're going to park the infrastructure piece aside for a moment and just say, from a real estate play development perspective, what did you find, if anything, noteworthy? And are you just going to wait till the main budget in July to see more action?
Just like for everything else, this was a directional speech for the economy. I feel. And if you look at real estate sector, there was only one specific and important announcement that they will construct 2 crore new low-cost housing by
Under PM
2025.
Awas
Right?
Yojana.
So that's great because they have constructed a few crores already. They may not have met the budget, but still, the huge amount of low-cost housing has been constructed, and that has a multiplier impact, as you know, besides providing housing for the poor. She did mention affordable housing.
For the middle class.
For the middle class. Now, a lot needs to be done there. They need to revamp the affordable housing policy completely, because in 2022, they pulled out some of the incentives and did not index to what the current situation is. The cost of construction has gone up. The cost of land has gone up. The cost of borrowing money, mortgage rates have gone up. the cost of borrowing money for a developer has gone up, but all the incentives and all are still dated, So I'm hoping that in the real budget, which is next later in the year, that will be addressed. She did, of course, mention, I think the biggest takeaway as far as I'm concerned from this budget was, capex increase, infrastructure, and also that they do have a target for fiscal deficit of 5.1 for 25. That means there's a clear recognition that that needs to be balanced. Rooftop solar was another interesting factor, that 1 crore people will benefit from that. If that is implemented, it'll make a difference. Electricity cost is really high in our country. And as you know, some of the state governments have won only by subsidizing electricity costs. So that will be a major one. And other thing quickly I liked about was the airports. She mentioned about new airports. Gati Shakti is another fantastic scheme of the government, and it was mentioned. I hope that in the coming budget, they'll talk about specific steps of what will be the real,
building blocks of
policy.
Gati Shakti. Mr. Sondhi, I'm coming to you for infrastructure. It's a theme that we turn to in every budget now for the last few years. 11% increase in the actual spend by the central government. But having said that, what was your biggest sort of tick?
First, thank you for having me. This is a confident government's budget.
Indeed.
And when you raise capex by 11% to 11 lakh crore and cut deficit to 5.1%, I think the numbers that were being discussed were 5.3 or 5.4, which is 50 basis points, but this has gone deeper, which means confidence in revenues as well as on spending. Capex has been consistent, actually. Even in the worst years, this government has spent on capex. And that has a multiplier effect. It has an effect on efficiencies, productivity, jobs, rural country. And generally, you can get from one place to another much faster than you could in the future. So I think that's tremendous. It also then helps us build scale when you look at the construction equipment industry. And then with scale means then you can participate as part of global value chains. I think that's extremely important. But I want to pick up on your first point and what Kunal also said. I think this 50-year, 1 lakh crore fund for innovation in deep tech. And I want to add to that as well, strategic areas like defense. That was also, we only spend 0.7% of our GDP on R&D as a country. The developed world spends between 2% and 3% of their GDP. So we're talking of
larger
America
economies
China.
and larger percentage.
Massive amounts. We need to do that. Industry now has to pick up this ball and move forward. Startups will do it, but I think regular industry, those who've been around for 30, 40, 50 years, need to invest in research and development in the future, which is future tech. I think it's going to be a big game changer. There are two other points, but we can pick them up later.
Why don't you go ahead and make them?
Okay. Manufacturing, nothing very specific, but when you look at what's announced in terms of the 3 rail corridors of cement, minerals, port connectivity, and high traffic density, it's all about reducing logistics costs, which we've been talking about from a manufacturing standpoint to be 13% or so, which is high, single digits. So this is all moving in the right direction. Electric vehicles, mainly around the fact that payments, there'll be payment guarantees against e-buses, so we know who we are pointing towards. But mass transportation is so important. And if e-buses are going to get the requisite focus, as well as charging infrastructure, as well as skill development of young people on this new technology, I think these were my takeaways specifically.
You know, I'm using this opportunity to try and understand if there's a pain point that could be addressed when the full budget is presented, because we know, it was a short speech. We pretty much covered all the ground there is to cover. So why waste an opportunity? If there is one area that you would flag off for, focused action when the full budget comes around in the summer, Kunal, what would you point towards?
Look, the government's done a lot for the startup ecosystem. Just to put it in context, in 2014, when this government first came to power, there were 350 registered startups with the government. The number now is 112,000. All in these last 10 years, give or take. So there's obviously a lot that has happened. It's because of the efforts of the entrepreneurs, but also, and obviously of the investors, but also of the government to evangelize, promote, and encourage the startup economy. That said, a big part of the startup economy are the people who work at these startups. The startup economy is now employing millions of people. And the way to incentivize them beyond just cash is actually ESOPs. And one of the enduring requests of the startup ecosystem has been ESOP taxation should be made more favorable for the person who is in receipt and who's exercising and thereafter selling the shares that they've got as ESOPs. Currently, an employee of a startup, when their ESOPs get vested, they have to pay tax at the point of exercise, at which point in time they own the share. However, they have not sold the share.
Yes.
So they've not received the money, the consideration, but they've had to pay the tax. And
Talk
many of
about a pain
them-
point.
Yeah, many of them may not have that tax, that capital to pay. So many times the ESOPs lapse. So our only request as an industry to the government has been, can we make the taxation kick in at the point of liquidity of that ESOP that is now converted to a share versus at the point of exercise? It will attract millions of more people to participate in the startup ecosystem for employment, as it will unlock wealth creation even for them.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, if you had to rate how receptive the government is to this request?
We will see when the full budget is announced.
Anshuman, same question to you. You know, there's one sort of sore area, pain point that could really do a lot to galvanize real estate.
I would say real estate and overall as economy, and this has been ignored since several years, that the government is expanding the tax base but not reducing it. Anywhere in the world, when you expand tax base, you reduce overall tax rates. Of course, corporate rates will reduce, income tax has been reduced very, very marginally. But overall, if this could be capital gain tax. In real estate right now, if you sell a house after 2 years, long-term capital gains is 20%. It should not be, for mutual fund is 10%. It's also, like I mentioned earlier, the incentives you get if you buy, let's say if you're a first-time buyer, there used to be an incentive that you'll get some tax write-off. They took it off. I mean, whatever it takes to stimulate demand, but overall also, please reduce taxes if you're widening the tax base. And government has widened tax bases quite a bit, but somehow this is always ignored,
And, I think capital gains rationalization and TDS rationalization, these are two areas which have been pending some action for a while. Maybe we got to wait till the summer.
Even GST, right now, even for example, affordable housing, steel, cement, all the inputs going in there, reduce the GST for that. There's no reason why it should be 28% or whatever the difference of steel, cement, and all the inputs are. And we're not saying entirely, just for the affordable housing sector, there was input credit which was been given earlier, it's been pulled out. So there's lots needs to be done, the taxation, and that itself will give huge stimulation on whatever happening on the ground.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that. Appreciate your time and your insights here on NDTV. Pleasure talking to you. access to credit at good rates, ease of doing business in real terms. So, simplification of processes, compliances, government compliances, all of this is a burden on MSMEs, much more of a burden than it is for a large corporation. On that front, are you still holding out hope that come the full budget, there'll be a more specific tackling?
I think that's very perceptive of you. You first highlighted the financial side. The historical thing has been that large corporates have funded their working capital by borrowing and making late payments, delayed payments to MSMEs. Last year's budget introduced a Section 43B, which penalized those who did not pay the MSMEs on time. At the end of the financial year, if you have more than 45 days outstanding to an MSME, that expenditure is disallowed and is imputed to be your income for the year. Now, with that, there has been a change in attitude of the larger corporates to find the funding themselves and not depend on the MSMEs, and the payments are being made on a much more timely basis. The whole thing is that the way people approach business is changing in the country, and also for MSMEs. There are a few pain points where I've had admissions from some of the large and responsible corporates saying that we have to overlook a lower price bid from an MSME because we cannot guarantee payment within 45 days due to our cash flow problems.
Okay.
Now, I think yes, you lose some business, but I think the gain in knowing
There's a net
certainty,
gain.
there's an end date. You know whether you're getting the money or not. To remain hanging and hopeful, and then find at the last moment that you hit a crisis because you're expecting payments to come in and they didn't come in, that is much more of a trouble than knowing with certainty that this payment will come after so much time. Then you can plan around it. The other thing is something which you have no control over.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point because it's an extremely important one. And some of these details often get missed. There are significant developments, and yet they get mixed. So I just wanted to say, if there's one thing that you hope that the full budget delivers on when it comes to the MSME sector, what would you pick?
Well, I think one thing is that I hope that when they're going for a reduction in the deficit in the next financial year, they will not cut back on government spending, so that the government spending will continue to act as a stimulus. So that is one thing. The other thing which I would like the finance minister to do is to ensure, which they did in the post-COVID times and in the last 1.5 years, is to make sure that they fund the public sector enterprises and units in a timely and proper manner. Because all said and done, they are major buyers within the Indian economy. If they buy and they don't have funds, they will delay payments. Now, MSMEs may not do direct business with these large entities, but they're part of the supply chain.
And so the whole supply chain suffers.
That's right. So being at the tail end of the supply chain, the MSMEs also suffer if the payment is not made appropriately by the government, large units, to the intermediaries who are the EPC contracts or the large corporates.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that. Ashok Sehgal, thank you very much for your insights, and look forward to taking stock once we have more with the full budget later this year.
Thank you. We look forward to continuity of the things emphasized by the finance minister in this speech today. Thank you.